The year is 476 AD. According to the history books, this was the year the Western Roman Empire took its final breath. The barbarian King Odoacer deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. From that moment on, the imperial eagles never again soared through the skies of Rome. At least that is the story history has taught us. But what if that story is wrong? What if Odoacer's sword never left its scabbard that day? What if Romulus Augustulus, that child emperor, grew up to become a true Caesar? What if Rome, in the sense we know it, never actually fell? Today we are traveling to one of the greatest divergence points in human history. Because the fall of Rome was not just the collapse of an empire, it was also the beginning of a 1,000-year dark age, and if that fall had never happened, the world you live in today would be different beyond anything you can imagine. This is the divergence point, and today we embark on a journey through an alternate timeline where Rome never fell, guided by the question, how would the past have shaped the future? Most people date the fall of Rome to the year 476. But the real truth is that the empire's fate was sealed exactly 98 years earlier, on August 9, 378, on the dusty plains of Thrace. This was Adrianople, Hadrianopolis, known today as Edirne. The Eastern Roman Emperor Valens assembled a massive army to bring the Gothic refugees who had crossed the Danube under control. He was proud, he was confident. The night before the battle, oracles promised him victory, but none of them told him that the next day, Rome's 800-year legend of invincibility would come to an end. On that day, the Roman legions were encircled by Gothic cavalry. Emperor Valens died on the battlefield. His body was never found. 2/3 of the army was destroyed. This was the heaviest defeat in Roman history. Nothing like it had been seen since Cannae. But the real catastrophe was not the lost soldiers. The real catastrophe was the crack that opened in Rome's armor. Because Adrianople sent a very clear message to the barbarian tribes, Rome could now be defeated. This is exactly where our divergence point lies. What if Valens had not fought that day? What if he had waited for his nephew Gratian's reinforcements? What if the Gothic cavalry had not emerged from behind those hills at that critical moment? In this alternate timeline, Valens acts with patience. The reinforcements arrive. The Goths are crushed decisively. The Gothic leader Fritigern is paraded through the streets of Constantinople in chains. Rome's legend of invincibility not only continues but grows even stronger, and history veers in an entirely different direction. After the victory at Adrianople, Rome manages to neutralize the barbarian threat, at least for a time. But the real change happens inside the empire's collective mind. Because in this timeline, Rome learns its greatest lesson not from the defeat at Adrianople, but from the fact that it was a narrowly avoided catastrophe. Emperor Theodosius I, whom history records as Theodosius the Great, does not divide the empire between his two sons as he did in our history. Instead, he undertakes much deeper military reforms. The legions are restructured. Dependence on barbarian mercenaries is reduced. Rome rebuilds a professional army composed of its own citizens, but perhaps the biggest change occurs in Rome's perception of barbarians. In this alternate timeline, Rome stops seeing the Goths and other Germanic tribes merely as enemies or mercenaries. It integrates them. It Romanizes them, just as it did centuries earlier with the Gauls. The Iberians and the Greeks. We need to pause here and clarify something. Rome's genius was never conquest. Rome's genius was making Romans out of the conquered. A Gaul would be born but die a Roman. A Spanish farmer would write his will in Latin as a retired legionary. This assimilation machine never stopped in our alternate timeline. The result, by the end of the 5th century, the concept of a barbarian invasion is erased from the history books. Because there are no more barbarians. Now, everyone is Roman. Now let us get to the most striking part of this story. In our real history, the fall of Rome plunged Europe into a darkness that would last 1,000 years. Aqueducts collapsed, roads were covered with grass. Literacy rates dropped below 1%. The last remnants of the Library of Alexandria were destroyed. Humanity, technologically and scientifically, stood still for nearly a millennium. But in our alternate timeline, the Dark Age never happens. To understand this, let us use a very simple example. In real history, after the fall of Rome, a building made of brick and mortar was not constructed in Britain for 900 years. 900 years, people lived in the ruins of buildings their great-grandfathers had built, having completely forgotten how to construct them. In our timeline, Rome's engineering knowledge continues to be passed down without interruption. Aqueducts not only remain standing, new ones are built. The formula for Roman concrete is not lost, on the contrary, it is improved. Roads expand, bridges rise higher. The Library of Alexandria is replaced by new imperial libraries in Constantinople, Rome, Carthage, and Londinium. The scientific heritage of ancient Greece does not have to return to Europe through Arabic translations because it was never lost. The works of Archimedes, the astronomy of Ptolemy, the medical knowledge of Galen continue to develop in an unbroken chain. What does this mean? Simple. The scientific revolution begins 500 years earlier than in our history. Now let us get a bit speculative, but let us base our speculation on the flow of history. In real history, steam power was discovered by Hero of Alexandria in the 1st century AD. This device, called the elipile, was a sphere that rotated using steam power, but the Romans saw it merely as a toy. Why? Because slave labor was so abundant and cheap that there was no need for machines. A Roman engineer would think, why should we use steam power when I have 10,000 slaves? But in our alternate timeline, the empire's continuous expansion and integration gradually transforms the institution of slavery. As Roman citizenship expands, the supply of slaves decreases. And at some point, a Roman engineer looks at that steam-powered sphere again and thinks, what if? The 12th century. In real history, this was the era of the Crusades, when Europe's population was decimated by famine and plague. But in our Rome, the first steam engine begins operating in a workshop in Londinium. Steam-powered carriages travel the imperial roads. The Roman navy builds ships propelled by steam rather than sail. The Industrial Revolution does not begin in Manchester or Birmingham, but simultaneously across the provinces of the Roman Empire, in Britain, Gaul, Egypt. Because the empire's integrated economy allows innovations to spread at lightning speed. And at this point, I want to ask you a very unsettling question. If the Industrial Revolution had begun in the 1200s rather than the 1700s, where would humanity be by the year 2000? Christopher Columbus, 1492. The ocean blue, we all know this story. But in our alternate timeline, the first Europeans to cross the Atlantic Ocean are not Spanish caravels. Those who cross the Atlantic are the steam-powered exploration ships of the Roman Imperial Navy, and this happens nearly 200 years earlier than in real history. In the early 14th century, the governor of Hispania, Rome's westernmost province, orders an exploratory expedition to the west. The goal, find an alternative sea route to Asia. The compass has long since been invented, and cartography has reached an advanced level in the schools of Alexandria. And one morning, an unknown land appears on the horizon. Now, here is a critical difference. In real history, the discovery of America resulted in plunder, genocide, and colonialism, because those who came were adventurers seeking gold, outlaws, nautical priests. But Rome had 1,500 years of experience in Romanizing conquered territories. This completely changes the fate of the Americas. When Roman legions enter the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they do not raze it to the ground. They transform it into a Roman provincial capital. Aqueducts are built, forums rise beside temples, Roman citizenship is offered to local elites. Yes, this is still a conquest. Yes, this is still a bloody process. But the result is not total cultural destruction as in real history. Instead, it is assimilation and integration. Aztec and Inca cultures are not completely erased. They melt into the Roman crucible, creating a new synthesis. The New World is not called America. They call it Nova Roma, New Rome. Now let us get to perhaps the most controversial part of this story. Religion. In real history, Christianity became the sole dominant religion of Europe after the fall of Rome. The Church controlled education, science, and politics. It put Galileo on trial, established the Inquisition, and slowed scientific progress for centuries. But in our alternate timeline, since Rome never fell, Christianity never becomes the sole dominant power in Europe. Instead, Rome's traditional system of religious tolerance continues. The Temple of Jupiter rises beside the Church of Christ. Mithraic cults, Jewish synagogues, Egyptian temples of Isis all coexist. The empire remains a religious mosaic, not a monolith. And in this mosaic, science can develop independently of religion, because no single religious authority has the power to obstruct a scientific discovery by claiming, "This contradicts my holy book." By the 15th century, the universities of the Roman Empire have become the world's most advanced centers of science. In Alexandria, Constantinople, Rome, and Nova Roma in our history is Mexico City. Scientists are debating atomic theory, conducting experiments with electricity, perhaps even developing the precursors to the internal combustion engine. Now let us get to the most crucial question. What would the world look like in the year 2024 in this alternate timeline? Imagine waking up in the morning. The city you see when you look out the window is filled with marble-clad skyscrapers. But that marble is not real stone. It is an evolved version of Roman concrete, a technology that has been developing for 2,000 years, a material that repairs itself in the rain. You turn on the news while having breakfast. The anchor is speaking Latin, but this is not the Latin of Cicero. It is a lingua franca that has been alive and evolving for 2,000 years, preventing the birth of English, Spanish, French, Italian, Romanian, and so many other languages. Modern Latin, the common language of the entire world. Today's topic on the news. New footage has arrived from the Mars colony, Novus Olympus. The Roman Empire's space program is about to establish a permanent settlement on the Red Planet. Legionary eagles now wave on another planet. Yes, you heard correctly. If the Roman Empire had never fallen, the space race would have been different too. The first human to set foot on the moon would not have been Neil Armstrong, but probably a Roman legionary. And that famous phrase would not have been one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, but in Latin. Imperium Romanum ad astra, the Roman Empire to the stars, world politics, nation-states do not exist. There's no country called France, no nation called Germany, no kingdom called England. Instead, there's the provincial system of the Roman Empire. The province of Gaul, the province of Germania, the province of Britannia. Each has its own local assembly, its own governor. But all are subordinate to the Roman Senate, a kind of global federal system. Democracy, interestingly, an evolved version of it. The representative democracy of the Roman Republic has gone through 2,000 years of development. Slavery has long been abolished. Women are in the Senate. Representatives of the provinces have equal voting rights in the imperial council. Perhaps not a perfect system, but it works. War has always existed throughout human history, and it would exist in this timeline too, but because it is a global empire. The great wars between nation-states would not happen. World War I, World War Roman II, the Cold War. These concepts do not exist in this timeline. Instead, there is economic competition between provinces, political intrigues, endless debates in the Senate. Nuclear weapons probably never invented, because what triggered the Manhattan Project was the threat of Nazi Germany. That threat was never born. Science was used for construction, not destruction. But every beautiful story has a dark side, and this world where Rome never fell also had a price. First, cultural diversity. In our world today, thousands of languages are spoken. Hundreds of different cultures, vastly different traditions, completely distinct cuisines, music, literatures exist. But under the shadow of Rome, much of this diversity would have melted in the assimilation pot. No Celtic languages, no Germanic languages, no Slavic languages. In their place, Latin dialects varying from province to province. Second, the concept of freedom. The absence of nation-states may sound peaceful, but it also means the absence of the right to self-determination. The Britons could never live as Britons under their own flag. The Gauls could never become French. Everyone was Roman, but this also meant that no one could truly be themselves. Third, the absence of revolutions. The French Revolution never happened. The American Declaration of Independence was never written. Concepts like human rights, equality, fraternity were perhaps never expressed with such force, because what triggered them was rebellion against oppression. Rome's integration system made oppression softer, more digestible, but did not eliminate it entirely, and perhaps most importantly, the absence of competition. In real history, the rise of Europe happened thanks to small states competing with each other. Spain, Portugal, England, France, the Netherlands, all of them set out to explore, invested in science, developed trade to surpass one another. In a place with a single colossal power like Rome, this competition would not exist, and without competition, progress slows down. Ironically, the fall of Rome may have been the greatest trigger for the birth of the modern world. Human history is full of divergence points. The outcome of a battle, a decision made by an emperor, sometimes even just the timing of a cavalry unit emerging from behind the hills. These moments are what we call the divergence point. The fall of the Roman Empire is seen as one of history's greatest tragedies. A 1,000-year dark age, lost technologies, forgotten science, but perhaps without that fall, the most beautiful aspects of the world we have today would also not exist. French cuisine, German engineering, English literature, Spanish art, the Italian Renaissance. None of these could have been born under the homogenizing shadow of Rome. Perhaps humanity's greatest leaps were born from the ashes of its greatest collapses. Rome fell, and we, upon its ruins, built our own towers. Perhaps this is history's greatest irony. Losing is sometimes more valuable than winning. I am Name, and this is the Divergence Point. Today we visited a world where Rome never fell. In the next episode, we will meet at another divergence point in another alternate timeline. Keep wondering, because history never flows along a single path. Rome never falling would have made the flow of human history almost unrecognizable. So what do you think? If the Roman Empire had never fallen, would the world have been a better place or a worse one? Or do you think everything happened exactly as it should have? Let us discuss in the comments. I am genuinely very curious to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Here at the Divergence Point, we bring you a new alternate history story every week. In the next episode, we are going to a very different divergence point. A hint, an assassination, a car, and a wrong turn. Can anyone guess? See you soon. Keep getting lost in the flow of history.